Hello, I'm Gordon.D.Webster, former journalist and railway history author, and you may have seen me on the BBC programme Inside Central Station. Today is a beautiful spring day and I'm about to head to the city of Glasgow to have a tour of the city by rail. Now, as I make my way to Craigendoran station today on the outskirts of Highland, I want to bring you back to something I did a few years ago, which was my book, The Railways of Glasgow Post Beeching, published by the History Press. And in that, I cover a lot of the 1960s and onwards railway history in Glasgow. So I'm going to use that basically as the companion piece today as we travel around the city. And, it was a massive era in terms of Scottish railway history. Two dramatic station closures in Glasgow. Now, that was, of course, St Enoch Station and Buchanan Street Station closing in the aftermath of the Beeching cuts. And on top of that, there was a changeover in traction from steam to diesel and electric. There was a lot of line closures. And of course, there was widespread electrification as well. So it was a massive era in Scottish railway history. I also want to give a mention to my two books from the Renewing Britain's Railways series, which is the first one, Scotland, because that covers the Glasgow and Strathclyde rail network in more recent years, and also the one which covers Cumbria in the north of England, principally because I've got a big section on the West Coast Main Line, and the West Coast Main Line, of course, is the principal route linking Glasgow and London. Right, so I've started off my day in sunny Helensburgh overlooking the Clyde coast. Now, you may ask what is the easiest way to get around as much of the Strathclyde rail network as possible in the one day. Now, that would be a SPT Roundabout ticket for only £7.40 for adults. Now, the Roundabout ticket, it gives unlimited travel across the whole of the network. The boundaries are from the west, starting at Dalriach outside Dumbarton, west and south furthermore towards Paisley, Barrhead, Neilston, east towards just beyond Airdrie, and to the north towards Croy and Cumbernauld and that sort of area. I think it goes as far as Cumbernauld towards the northeast. Now, I must stress here, I'm not trying to push the envelope or do anything groundbreaking. I didn't get up at the crack of dawn. I'm not going to try and cover every line or every station or anything like that. I just want to do a bit of it in a leisurely fashion. I'm going to head out shortly to Craigendoran, and I will get my ticket at Dumbarton Central from the ticket office. And I hope you enjoy watching this, and I hope you learn a bit about the history of the Strathclyde network along the way. Our Strathclyde rail journey begins on the top left of your screen here. You'll see Dalmuir Station, which was formerly known as Dalmuir Park. Now, we're starting off at Craigendoran, which comes in basically from the top left of this map. Just as we come into the Strathclyde area, this map shows the general Strathclyde rail network as it looks post-Beeching, i.e. as it looks today, and it's only the key stations which are highlighted on this map. There is a lot more, of course. Following Dalmuir, we will be taking the route to the north, which goes to Westerton, and that runs via Drumchapel. It's part of what's known today as the electrified North Clyde Line. Another extension of that is the part which goes south, and also ultimately to the east, but it goes through Clydebank and Yoker, more or less along the banks of the River Clyde. Now, I must stress, as before, I didn't try to cover the whole network. I pretty much had no plan for what I was going to do in the roundabout journey. It was all made up on the day. It was very much improvising, often changed at the last second according to what time I got into each station and so forth. There was very, very little freight running because this was a Saturday. The one freight train which I was aware of was the North Blythe to Fort William alumina tanks, which ended up running early, and there was, it seemed like it would be quite difficult to try and squeeze in a shot of it somewhere. So anyway, this is pretty much the whole of the Glasgow network. The way I did it was, so I started off in the west, I went west, north, east, south, and west again to come home. Now, the day didn't actually get off to the best of starts because I was a little bit late arriving in Craigendoran and kind of had forgotten the timetable a little bit. And it just so happened that I hot-footed it onto the train leaving for Edinburgh Waverley, Linford Christie style, thinking the doors were going to close on me at the last possible second before I could get to it. But it turned out the train actually sat at the platform with doors open for about 5 minutes once I was on it, so I could have sauntered along and I would have been fine. The reasons for this was there was a late running West Highland train. An Oban to Glasgow train was given priority at the junction at Craigendoran, so we waited, it overtook, and then I headed on my journey east. Now, I'm going for this DVD movie style audio commentary I'm trying this out on a couple of videos. I hope it's to your liking. I'm certainly no Steven Spielberg, and I don't think I have the suaveness of Roger Moore, but this seems like a nice, relaxing way to cover some of the history of the Glasgow network. This was the site which met me at Dumbarton Central after what I said earlier. It was indeed closed, the ticket office, so I used a machine. And I had to be quite quick using the machine because this class 320 and 318 formation was arriving just as my ticket was printing out. So I jumped in this train. The text you will see on the screen will denote every train I travelled on this day. It's not showing every train I saw, just the ones which I travelled on. So this was train number 1. The route we're now following is part of the Lanarkshire and Dumbartonshire Railway. Just for a short section though, most of this route is the former Glasgow, Dumbarton and Helensburgh Railway. The Lanark and Dumbarton became part of the Calais, the Caledonian Railway. The Glasgow, Dumbarton and Helensburgh Railway became part of the North British, so we're on mainly North British Railway network metals. The exception is a short section around Dumbarton East Station. There was a deviation made when the Glasgow Blue Train electric units were introduced in the 1960s. But yeah, it's largely the ex-North British Railway route, which was then part of the LNER, the London North Eastern. As we see this tanker coming into Bowling, you also see the remains of the Bowling oil terminal, which was formerly rail connected. I want to mention Clyde Shipbuilding because as the Clyde narrows, we're getting towards Clyde Bank and Scotstoun and Govan, and the area which was, Glasgow shipbuilding, where do you start really, and its influence on the railways. There was so many connecting railway lines on the docks. Some of the biggest ocean liners in the world were born in Glasgow essentially. Ocean liners such as RMS Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth, warships like HMS Hood, the most famous company being John Brown and Co of Clyde Bank. Now, financial problems at the Glasgow shipyards resulted in 1968 an infamous work-in industrial action. It ultimately saved the remaining yards, but there was a massive decline. You'll see the Erskine Bridge here. The Erskine Bridge was built in 1971. It replaced the Erskine Ferry. And yeah, formerly very busy, of course, with tankers and steamers, various ships. And yeah, like I said, Clyde Shipbuilding severely declined into the 1970s. It was saved, as I said. So yeah, there was always a steady stream of goods traffic on the railway thanks to Clyde Shipping. The Erskine Bridge, you'll see there, it passes over the railway at Kilpatrick Station. And this is Dalmuir itself, Dalmuir Park, until it was renamed following the Beeching cuts. This is a map of the western side of the city, and you'll see in more detail where the line splits into two at Dalmuir. Now, I just missed it on camera actually. You'll see we actually, arriving into Singer, we pass over the Clyde Bank line. If you look very carefully on the next shot, you will see the Clyde Bank line diverging under in a cutting. Now, most of the lines you see here on the screen are now electrified. The solid line is, of course, the lines that are open today. The dotted lines, well, one variation of the dots I've done is the closed lines. Like if you look at Partick West, for example, Mary Hill, that's the closed lines. Then at the bottom right, the sort of longer dotted lines, that's basically to show the underground sections going through Queen Street and Central Low Level. So yeah, they're known as the low level lines because they are essentially underground. And yeah, this is a good example of the lines that close. Most of these were under Beeching. The line through Botanic Gardens Station, it was open until the 60s, but it hadn't seen a passenger service in many, many years. You'll see there's also a triangle of lines at Jordan Hill. The western side of that's not used very often, just for empty coaching stock workings. Just passing under us here, if you look carefully, that's the cutting with the line to Clydebank and Yoker. We are still on board this Class 320. I just want to point out the nice little murals there still is inside the Class 320s, inside their saloons. They show various scenes in Glasgow, like Scotland Street Museum, there's one there, Glasgow University, I think that's Scotland Street School and Glasgow University, so that's a nice touch. There's the line from Milngavie, curving in at Westerton Junction. This is Westerton Station. I've just got off, going to change train onto the Milngavie line. If you're not from the area, Milngavie, not Milngavie, and only really became used to that because I actually grew up in Milngavie when I was basically a baby. There's another Class 318 just heading east at Westerton. West Highland trains also pass through here. They actually work wrong line for a certain short section, and that's due to the crossover at Knightswood North Junction. Now this is looking towards Westerton Junction. This is the controlling signal. A plane flying over there. I was pretty keen to just keep the camera running to get that in the shot. But the feather, the bit which lights up at the top of the signal, that basically lights up whenever there's a train going on to the Milngavie branch, and this is one here. This is the train I got on, arriving under the disabled access friendly footbridge, a very recent addition there at Westerton. This is us curving away on the Milngavie branch. Now the Milngavie branch is mostly single track. It was singled, I know they started the project around 1990, it was either 90 or 91. It reopened. There's a short double track section. There was a lot of opposition to this, by the way. Following the Belgrove accident, it was noted how dangerous potentially single lead junctions could be. You know, if somehow things didn't go as they were supposed to. Unfortunately, the line was singled in the end. I think now with the enhanced timetable, it's clear to see there's restrictions due to that. So that was some big upheaval on the Milngavie branch. This is Milngavie Station. A very colourful Class 334, the leading car in the Pride livery, which looks pretty interesting. I mean, the ScotRail trains can look a bit mundane. It's good to see a bit of variation there. They're just over to the right hand side there, I believe, was the goods yard, which is now mostly the station car park. And this is where the West Highland Way begins as well, in the town. It was quite lively on this lovely spring day. You can hear the busker playing Breakfast at Tiffany's. This is us going back, and this is us going from the double section onto the single line again, just south of Bearsden, and arriving back into Westerton. This is Knightswood North Junction. That's the line to Maryhill, which the West Highland trains take. That's it. I don't know if we're going downhill or if that line's going uphill, but that's the junction there, Knightswood North Junction. And this is Anniesland Station. I should point out, just the way this day went, I wasn't able to include the line that goes via Clydebank to show you the area around where the shipyards used to be, but I will be returning and yeah, hopefully doing a roundabout again and covering more of the city on a future video. So yeah, there wasn't really time to do that. At Anniesland, I decided to wait and then board a local train to Glasgow Queen Street. That's the crossover there for the branch line, which goes up to Maryhill via Kelvindale, and that junction there, Knightswood South Junction, was reinstated in late 2015. The branch line itself actually reopened back in 2005, but strangely there was no actual junction which was reinstated at Anniesland. This was originally a line which it closed many decades ago. It hadn't actually had a passenger service since the First World War. That's how long it had been. Well, this is the section through Kelvindale. So in 2005, the link between Anniesland and Maryhill Park Junction via Kelvindale, a very short line, it reopened, and Kelvindale Station was open then as well. But yeah, there was no junction at Anniesland, which was very strange. The branch line essentially just passed the main line, but in 2015, late 2015, the junction was reinstated, and that was mainly to facilitate diversions. This was during the closure of Glasgow Queen Street, which you'll see also on the map there, Glasgow Queen Street High Level, that is, for electrification in 2016. So the junction was added then much later on, and that allowed trains out of Glasgow Queen Street High Level to Aberdeen, Inverness, etc. to travel via the low-level system as part of a diversion programme. And that shows the north side of the city there. You'll see the route we're about to take. As you can see, a very short section up to Maryhill. And that's us joining at Maryhill Park Junction with the line which comes in from Westerton. So you've seen both Knightswood South Junction and Knightswood North Junction. We're just passing over the River Kelvin on a viaduct there. It wouldn't be a city scene if it wasn't complete without screaming baby on board the train you might hear amongst all the voices. Quite a busy train this was, in fact, and I've been in this line but it's been very quiet, so it's good to see it is seeing a good amount of local usage. Now this was a Saturday, and it was a good day to go actually, because it was the day before an Old Firm game, before a Rangers versus Celtic football match. So that meant you avoided any really busy trains, you know, with football fans. Now we're approaching the Springburn area. Now this is a very important section of railway with a lot of railway history, I may add. Now that is the Cowlairs East Curve. This is us approaching the Cowlairs Triangle, or well, one of the Cowlairs Triangles. This is the main one. We're curving southwards. You'll see it on the map here in just a second. So you'll see on the map there, now the Cowlairs East Curve, which is the right in the top left of the screen. Now that has been very rarely used for a large number of years, and it had to be used by a certain number of trains every day or every week to still be there to survive. So it essentially actually saved the West Highland Line sleeper. That was Eastfield Traction Maintenance Depot, you could see there. And this is how it looked in the early 1990s. This is Eastfield Diesel Depot, or Traction Maintenance Depot. It closed in 1993. It was originally opened by the North British Railway and then part of the LNER, one of the large steam sheds in the Glasgow area. It was closed, it was razed to the ground and reopened in 2004. And this is approaching essentially the second Cowlairs Triangle. That's the line to Springburn heading off there. This is of course where all the famous railway works were, including the North British Locomotive Company. And that's Cowlairs Signalling Centre and Training Centre. So yeah, there's a lot of important railway history in the Cowlairs and Springburn area. That's the Cowlairs Cord there, which was reinstated around 1989, 1990, that sort of time. That allows trains to go directly from Glasgow Queen Street High Level up towards Springburn. And that's the former trackbed there. The space you'll see on the screen was the Port Dundas branch. Port Dundas and Craighall Goods. It used to basically follow that wasteland you can see kind of going off into the distance on Cowlairs Bank. Now this was taken a different day actually. This is the Forth and Clyde Canal at Port Dundas in the north side of the city. So there was a network of lines here originally. This is an old swing bridge. Now there used to be railways around Pinkston Power Station, the massive power station, which at one point it was the power source for the Glasgow trams, the trolley buses, and also the Glasgow Underground. And somehow, despite there being no railway there, this swing bridge has survived. So it's quite an interesting area. Back on the train on the day of the roundabout, getting off at Glasgow Queen Street High Level. Queen Street truly is one of the architectural gems of Glasgow and one of the great railway stations of the British Isles. It really is. So Queen Street was opened on the 21st of February 1842 by the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway, And at that time it had a very tightly spaced 6 platform layout, only 6 platforms. It's now got a wee bit more than that. This is the end of the platforms. You'll see there's not much distance between the end of the platforms and Cowlaire's Tunnel. Now, Cowlaire's Tunnel is 1,006 yards long, and it carries trains up the formidable Cowlaire's Incline, which ranges in a gradient of between 1 in 41 and 1 in 51, so pretty formidable. And in the early days of the railway, because of the severity of the gradient, cable was used to help haul trains up the hill, up the bank, into Springburn. And how about this for a shot? This is from 1990, and this is a Class 47 on a train from Inverness to Glasgow Queen Street arriving. You might hear my brother, who was a top back then, in the background, getting excited. These were the days of local haul trains, of course. They didn't have much time left around 1990-91. From the late 80s, in fact, things would change quite dramatically. This is some images from back in the late 1980s. That's a Class 47 on an Edinburgh to Glasgow push-pull train, and a West Highland train arriving with a Class 37. Another 47 here, a bit of technical information about them because they were such a familiar sight in the Glasgow area and in Scotland. They were built by Brush Traction starting in 1962 at Crewe Works, the 47s. They carried a Sulzer 12DA AA28C engine, which produced 2,580 horsepower, and they're still around today. And some more up-to-date shots again. That's the magnificent James Carswell designed roof at Queen Street. This roof is 450 feet long, has a central arch which spans 170 feet, and it reaches a height of 79 feet off the ground. So Queen Street was originally owned by the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway, then the North British Railway. From 1923 it was the LNER, and from 1948 British Railways. Mostly electric traction these days. It was electrified, as I alluded to earlier, in 2016. And the platforms were extended as well to cater for these Class 385 units. You could see shots of one or two of them. That's one on the right there. You can see in this next shot, that's one of the extended, two of the sections of extended platforms there. So the concourse was essentially brought further out towards George Square when Queen Street was refurbished in recent years. And there's some shots here which will show you how it looks in relation to the rest of Glasgow. Now the next few shots, these were taken on a different day, just to give some context. That's the new entrance to Queen Street. And you can see George Square there and the council chambers. Statues there of Sir Robert Peel, the Prime Minister, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. On these evening shots you'll notice a couple of HSTs arriving, the famous and very popular high-speed trains of British Railways, otherwise known as Intercity 125 sets. And you'll notice in the shots you see here, now the HSTs are not allowed to pull right up to the buffer stops. Someone somewhere made the decision that due to their exhaust fumes, there's some rule that they're not allowed to go right up to the buffer stops. And this is after actually the HSTs have been re-engined. They were re-engined with MTU power units in fairly recent years. That's a West Highland train leaving there. Yeah, originally, if you're someone growing up in the 1980s and 1990s, you'll be very familiar, possibly, of the sights and sounds of the HSTs with the original engines, the famous Paxman Valenta power units, which produced a power output of 2,250 horsepower, so they were very noisy and very smoky indeed. This is the former, I believe this is the former goods yard area on the east side of Queen Street. Now, Queen Street became busier following the closure of Glasgow Buchanan Street station. Now, originally there was 4 terminus stations in Glasgow. There was Queen Street, Glasgow Central, Glasgow St Enoch and Glasgow Buchanan Street. That's Buchanan bus station there, sorry, I meant to add. Also important to show the other modes of transport. And one of Sir Nigel Gresley's magnificent A4 Pacifics at Glasgow Buchanan Street. Glasgow Buchanan Street closed in November 1966. It was a north-facing terminus station like Queen Street. You can see that's the road bridge there carrying the road Dobbie's Loan, and this is how Dobbie's Loan looks today, with Glasgow Caledonian University occupying a lot of the site of the closed Queen Street. And this is the former tunnel mouth, which was just to the north of the station. It's still there. It's very difficult to access now, so this is a photograph taken on a different day because you can no longer actually get access to it. This is part of the former station site of Buchanan Street. This is the station entrance, and this is on Port Dundas Road, I believe. This is how it looks nowadays, and this is the office block known as Buchanan House. It was originally built as ScotRail House, and as you'll see, it is starting to be demolished. Buchanan Street was formerly the terminus for trains to Inverness, Aberdeen, Dundee West and Oban, amongst other destinations, and it was operated by the Caledonian Railway, which then became part of the LMS, the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. So being a north-facing terminus, like Queen Street, trains out of Buchanan Street, so they used to have to journey up this lengthy tunnel uphill in a steep gradient, emerging in the Springburn area, next to the famous Springburn Works, St Rollock's Works, which has survived in use by the railway in more recent years. And another, I think if you were familiar with that line, would be the deep cutting as trains emerge from the tunnel near the Tennant's Chemical Works, and that's the reason for the foul smell you might have often noticed up in the Springburn Sight Hill area. You do notice it a bit if you're on a train going into Glasgow Queen Street. But with the closure of Buchanan Street, all the trains that worked out of there were then transferred to start running out of Glasgow Queen Street, and it's remained like that ever since. On to the next leg of our journey now, and we're going underground. We're going into the east end of the city, and this is a map of the East End Rail Network as it looks nowadays. Now, I want to point out the distinction between the Glasgow Queen Street and Glasgow Central low-level systems. You will see the longer dotted sections of line there are the subterranean lines, which are still open. That's just to show you the difference between the subterranean sections and the open-air sections. The central low-level line, to cut a long story short, was closed in 1964, but the Queen Street one was retained and became the North Clyde line. Now, the central low-level route, despite being closed by Beeching, was expensively reopened in 1979 as the Argyll line, and this pretty much entails the whole subterranean section of line between Rutherglen and the Finnieston area. Rather than the route reopening the whole way out to Partick West and the old route to Clyde Bank, it just was reopened between Rutherglen and Finnieston, where there was a new, what you call a burrowing junction made to allow a new junction between the North Clyde line and the reopened Argyll line near Finnieston. So that's pretty much the western extent of the line today. Like I said, a very expensive reopening in 1979, around the time of the reopening of the Glasgow subway too, which had been closed for a few years now. Since 1964, when the Argyll line, or the original Lanarkshire and Dumbartonshire Railway, had closed, everything was pretty much still there. The tunnels, the trackbed, the retaining walls, they had to be really power hosed down to remove this hefty covering of soot all along the tunnels and the walls. That had just built up over decades of steam operation, because the line through Glasgow Central low level, it was steam operated right until the very end. And it was well known for being a particularly, I guess, an unhealthy place, a very dark and smoky environment. So when it reopened, it was, of course, electric trains that started running. A new station at Finnieston in the West End, which was to serve Exhibition Centre, or the Scottish Exhibition Conference Centre, should I say, the SECC. And nowadays it's very well used for the Hydro Arena. That was one of the main station reopenings. Now, at Bridgeton, it was formerly a station called Bridgeton Cross, and you'll see on the map there was a line which diverged, which went off to Carmyle, but via Parkhead Stadium. That also closed in 1964, another former Caledonian Railway route. Of course, Parkhead Stadium, well used for the Celtic ground, for Celtic Park, for fans travelling there, similar to Ibrox on the joint railway out to Paisley, which also shut. Both the old firm teams, they had obviously well-used railway stations which were closed. Nowadays, the Celtic fans, as far as I'm led to believe, use Belgrove and Dalmarnock. Belgrove's on the North Clyde line, you'll see on the map. Whereas the Rangers fans use the underground to get to Ibrox on the Glasgow subway, and that gets very, very busy in match days normally. So looking at the map, you will also see the line which nowadays goes back out to Edinburgh via Airdrie Bathgate. Now that was reopened around 2009-2010. For a number of years it terminated at Drumgelloch next to Airdrie. So it was another expensive reopening, another line that had been closed following the Beeching cuts. And you'll see obviously a few goods yards were in the area as well, which closed and would be replaced in the early 1980s by Moss End Yard, which we're going to pass shortly on our journey along the reopened Argyll line. I'm going to be mentioning my Glasgow post-Beeching book quite a bit. You may see it appear on the screen from time to time. Another important post-Beeching reopening was the Rutherglen and Coatbridge Railway. So basically on this journey we're about to head out to Motherwell. We start at Argyll Street station here. It's unusual, Argyll Street. You go down a great big escalator and then you go up another one. It's just because of the way the buildings are in the city centre that it's laid out that way. So look at this. This is a classic underground subterranean railway station. Imagine this in the days of steam. Imagine the atmosphere. It must have been something else. There wasn't a station called Argyll Street at that time, I believe. Argyll Street is more or less a new station. Now that's where the Parkhead Stadium line used to diverge. This is entering Bridgeton Cross, but it's now just called Bridgeton Station. There was formerly a Bridgeton Central Station, which was a terminus used by the North British Railway on just coming off what's nowadays known as the North Clyde line. But yeah, that was the junction there for the line that went to Carmyle via Parkhead Stadium. So we're travelling along the Argyll line for a few miles. Then we're briefly joining the West Coast Main Line at Rutherglen, and then we're on the Rutherglen and Coatbridge Railway, which was another post-Beeching closure. We'll get to that shortly. We're just leaving Dalmarnock Station there, which was refurbished for the Commonwealth Games in 2014. Crossing the River Clyde here as we get towards Rutherglen. And Bridgeton Yard, it seems to be more or less in Rutherglen rather than Bridgeton. Still used, it looks like, for permanent way purposes. So we're getting towards the end of what they now call the Argyll line and curving onto the West Coast Main Line at Rutherglen. There used to be a Rutherglen platform, an island platform on the West Coast Main Line, which has now been removed. Oh, well, the remains are actually still there. We'll see that shortly. That is the Rutherglen Permanent Way Depot. A few on-track plant machines, obviously very important part of maintaining our railway. This is Carmyle as we're continuing into the east end of the city. The Rutherglen and Coatbridge Railway, which goes through Whifflet, it wasn't actually closed completely as such. I maybe should have made that clearer. The line was still there, but it hadn't seen a passenger service since Beeching. Baillieston's one of the stations on the line. We've passed Whifflet now. We're now passing Moss End Yard. The Whifflet trains were reintroduced in 1993, half-hourly. So getting further towards Motherwell, Moss End, a rather large marshalling yard, which sadly now you can see there's not a lot of traffic there. This was a Saturday, but not too many wagons. There's two sides to Moss End. This is the general sort of side used by wagon load freight, formerly what they called the Rail Freight Speedlink network. The other side's more or less used for the stabling of locomotives, mainly electric. And now Motherwell Traction Maintenance Depot, which also fell into decline, but it is back open as a depot, which is good. This was the main diesel depot in Scotland to maintain locomotives following the closure of Eastfield in 1993. And it was used by EWS but then closed again in 2007. It had become quite a quiet place. It does still retain its original steam shed built by the Caledonian Railway. It's now a wagon repair depot, so it was closed in 2007 and reopened in more recent years, so at least it's back open. This is Motherwell Station, where the electrified suburban network dissects more or less the West Coast Main Line. That's a Pendolino there, a Glasgow to London Euston train. A lot of them now actually stop at Motherwell. Avanti West Coast are the operator. It was formerly Virgin West Coast, of course. Class 390 Tilton trains. They operate now to a very high frequency. They replace locomotive hauled trains around 2004-2005, and they're a very familiar sight here, as are the suburban trains. Now, this is on the West Coast Main Line, but this is a Lanark train, Class 385 approaching. So we're going to get on the 385, we're going to head back, we're going to retrace our steps on the line out of Motherwell, but we're not going to take the Argyll line this time. And we are now 91 miles from Carlisle on the West Coast Main Line and entering an area with very many railway junctions. That there was Jerviston Junction. This is now Moss End West Junction approaching Bells Hill. There's various lines dissect each other here, mainly because it's near Moss End Yard, which is a big freight hub. This is Uddingston, this is View Park Cement Terminal. You can see the siding which serves it there. Passing Cambus Lang, we're approaching Rutherglen once again. And there's the Permanent Way Yard, another view of that. So we're back in the West Coast Main Line after going off the West Coast Main Line for a short section in order to access Bells Hill. And you will see here the former platform at Rutherglen which served the West Coast Main Line. For local trains, I must add, but it's on the West Coast Main Line, you can see it there. We're now approaching Polmadie, a very famous railway depot. It was where the London Midland Scottish Railway maintained their Pacifics designed by Sir William Stanier, the famous Duchess class, and the Princess Royals. They were shedded here. It's now used by Serco Caledonian Sleeper and for the West Coast Main Line traffic such as the Pendolino units. You'll see a Class 92 there with one of the sleeper carriages. Polmadie was opened by the Caledonian Railway. My grandfather actually worked there. The odd time, I believe, he was based at St Rollock's Works. He worked for the LMS, and as a result he didn't have to go and fight in the war because he was employed by the railway, and that's part of the reason I am who I am, and I'm bitten by this railway bug, unfortunately. And here we are, Glasgow Central, approaching across the Clyde Bridge. If you look down carefully here, you'll see the piers which are still remaining from the original Clyde Bridge. This current structure was added back in the days of steam, back in the Victorian era, and then eventually in 1961 the old bridge was removed, concentrating all the traffic on the new bridge, but the piers are still remaining. One addition to Central in 2010 was this archway here was opened up. There was originally no tracks there, it was the station car park, and as part of the Glasgow Airport Rail Link there was enhancements to Central and 2 new platforms were added, much needed. The airport rail link itself was actually shelved by the government but the enhancements at Central were still made. It's a very busy station, and it's the busiest railway station in Britain out with London. There's not many diesel units these days, it's mostly electric. That's a class 156. And how about this? This is in the 1970s, following electrification, one of the Blue Train units, probably coming off the Clyde coast, or perhaps the south side of Glasgow, maybe the Cathcart Circle. There's no sound to this old footage, so I'm having to improvise. There's a diesel and electric unit passing one another. And of course the West Coast Main Line was electrified in the mid-1970s, seeing the introduction of these Class 87s, or the Electric Scots as they were known. So local haulage did obviously survive for a number of years at Central, and we're going to see more examples of that. Some still photographs here in the late 1980s showing Class 47s, which operated the Glasgow and South Western lines out to Carlisle via Dumfries and the line out to Stranraer. So Glasgow Central was opened in August 1879 by the Caledonian Railway, and it replaced the original terminus station on Bridge Street across the river. It had 8 platforms to begin with. These were eventually extended right out over the Clyde Bridge. There was a major rebuild in 1901. Of course, Central Station, it has the iconic entrance below the Highland's umbrella over Argyle Street. In the 1950s, there was some vast changes when there was major re-signalling and track rationalisation in the run-up to electrification, and one of the first lines to be electrified was the Cathcart Circle, which we will be travelling on shortly into the south side of Glasgow. I should also point out that from 1966, Glasgow Central became busier due to the closure of the neighbouring Glasgow St Enoch terminus. So St Enoch was the fourth of the big Glasgow city centre terminuses, and like Buchanan Street, it was closed in 1966 following the Beeching cuts. If you're not so familiar on what the Beeching cuts actually were, it refers to the closure of around 1/3 of the total amount of lines on Britain's rail network, starting in 1963, and it followed the government's publication of a special report, widely known as the Beeching Report. Dr. Richard Beeching was the mastermind behind that, and as we've discussed, it had a profound impact on Glasgow's railways. On to Glasgow's south side, and keep an eye on the top middle of that map. You will see the former Glasgow St Enoch marked there. We will be returning to that because I did actually visit the station area after I'd made a further journey south, so we will come back to that. But that shows you where the two main stations were in relation to the River Clyde. It shows the many lines south of the river, which were by and large split between the Glasgow and South Western Railway and the Caledonian Railway, grouped together in 1923 to become part of the LMS. Out towards the Paisley direction, the LMS had not only Paisley-Gilmer Street but Paisley Canal, on which was essentially a diversionary route, which you'll see from the map there. It actually rejoined the main line which goes out to Ayr near Elderslie. Now, that line, it survived following Beeching. What actually happened was it was still used by trains out to Kilmacombe, but the Kilmacombe branch, which had originally gone out all the way out to Greenock, it was still serving Kilmacombe for a number of years following Beeching, but then that closed in 1983. That was the line which went out via Bridge of Weir, and then at the same time, Paisley Canal Station was closed, and that line you can see on your screen out towards Paisley Canal, it was actually cut back to Hawkhead Oil Terminal for freight only. Then, now this is the real folly of the Beeching cuts which we always see today. There's so many of these lines closed, have then ended up decades later been expensively reopened, and that's exactly what happened with Paisley Canal. It reopened in 1990 for a full passenger service. you'll see the stations on the map there which were reopened, such as Hawkhead and Paisley Canal, of course. But it didn't, when it was reopened, terminate at Paisley Canal, rather than continuing on to rejoin the main Paisley joint route as it used to be known. So that was a success. The Neilston line survived it, although prior to the 1960s it used to continue out towards Uplaw Moor. The East Kilbride line almost closed during the 1980s. There was a big campaign to save it. The Cathcart Circle is a key hub of lines as well. You'll see the smaller map in the bottom right corner that gives some more detail. It's just the Cathcart Circle, there's so many stations within about, I think it's a 5 to 5.5 mile radius, about 10 stations. So they've packed very close together. So we have a more detailed map showing the Cathcart Circle. Believe it or not, someone associated with the British government produced a report in 1945 called the Bruce Report, which had a plan to close both Glasgow Central and Glasgow St Enoch stations. Obviously that gets shelved. Absolute madman, whoever came up with that. That would never have seen the light of day, surely. But ultimately, St Enoch would be later sacrificed. And it wasn't just that both the stations were to be closed, but they were to be replaced by a brand new station called Glasgow South, which certainly would not have been cheap, so absolute crazy. Now, as we move on to the next leg of our journey, we're about to join the Cathcart Circle. And the Cathcart Circle, it was one of the first lines in Glasgow to be electrified. That was during 1962. We're just arriving into Cathcart Station here. There's an interesting triangle of lines at Cathcart also. There is. As this train leaves, it's heading in the direction of Cathcart West Junction. That's where the branch to Neilston continues on. Or should I say the Cathcart Circle continues on to the right, but the line to Neilston diverges to the left. But that line on the left there is actually a joining line. It's kind of a double junction. That is part of the triangle there. You can see the bridge in the background, and the bridge in the foreground with the pigeons is next to Cathcart Station. A better shot there. The line in the background is one side of the triangle, which allows through running from Kirkhill and Newton towards Cathcart in the direction of Neilston. So we've just come down the east side of the Cathcart Circle, which is far more well used, far busier with trains. The west side only generally is a half-hour frequency for most of the day. Here's a Cathcart Circle train starting at Glasgow Central, ending at Glasgow Central. So that's just come off the west side of the circle, which goes via Maxwell Park and Shawlands. We'll be retracing the same route up the east side of the Cathcart Circle to Mount Florida. And you can just make out Hampden Park in the background there, the Scottish National Football Stadium, also a big outdoor concert venue. And this is the station serving it. Clearly not a very big station. It's very difficult with the geography and all the tenements to really expand a station like this, so it does get very busy, especially for match days involving Scotland or the Scottish League teams during cup finals and semi-finals. And well, when you get the chance, you may as well give the lift a try as well, I suppose. This allows disabled access from one end of the station. There's actually two entrances and exits to Mount Florida Station. I've just taken the one which is slightly more to the north towards the platform end. Quite handy. It was a station that really needed improvements given how well used it is. Obviously a well used commuter station too, as are all the stations on the Cathcart Circle. Like I said, they're very close together, the stations. Now that's the City Union line crossing near Eglinton Street in the outskirts of Glasgow Central, and that was originally the main line out of St Enoch. You can actually see the remaining bridge which carried the line out of St Enoch in the background there, the City Union Bridge across the Clyde. And the fourth of Glasgow City Centre's grand stations, it was Glasgow St Enoch. It had this grand entrance, and it was opened by the City of Glasgow Union Railway originally, and that was in 1876, but it was then taken over by the Glasgow and South Western Railway. St Enoch was also notable for having two grand glass roofs, like a sort of semi-cylindrical design, and architecturally it was very impressive, and also unusual was the fact that it was a south-facing station, but essentially the entrance was almost facing east, so the railway was actually on quite a sharp curve coming out of the station. It had very severely curved platforms, and it then joined a triangle of lines which was part of this original Crossrail network. So there was part of the triangle went north and east towards like the Belgrove and Parkhead area, but then the main tracks headed south and across the River Clyde, across the City Union Bridge, which survives today. And right next to the entrance to St Enoch was Glasgow St Enoch subway station, which can be seen in the photo, which itself does survive today. Part of St Enoch mainline station's real downfall, it was the fact it was so close to Glasgow Central. It wasn't very far away at all, and it was decided that the destinations that it served in the southwest of the country could be just as easily served from Glasgow Central, and that resulted in the closure of St Enoch in June 1966 as a passenger train destination, but it did survive in railway use until 1967, used by parcels trains. Now, the station, when it was closed, it served 250 trains a day and 23,000 passengers on average. So these all had to be relocated to Glasgow Central. So it was a watershed moment once again. And the building itself, the big canopies, the station roofs, survived until 1977. They were used to house a car park for a while. The St Enoch Hotel's obviously another big part of the entrance to the station, which you could see in the photographs there. And here we see nowadays how it looks with the St Enoch Centre there. The camera here is pretty much following the alignment of the track, curving right towards the River Clyde. You can see the connecting embankment there of the triangle, which now carries the City Union line. And that's it a bit closer up. So that line is used for everyday empty coaching stock movements. That's the Clotha pub, scene of the terrible 2013 tragedy with the helicopter crash. And the City Union Bridge. So this was the main bridge carrying the railway out of St Enoch. As I mentioned earlier, still in railway use, carrying the rather sparsely used City Union line. And that's the Central Station Bridge as the sun sets on this beautiful, great day out, I must say. I really enjoyed this, and I hope to continue my roundabout journey covering other parts of the city on future videos. Homeward bound now as the sun sets. But strap in, because we're not done yet. We're just about to visit the Glasgow subway. So just to finish off the final part of the video, grab yourself a tea or a coffee as we finish off, or grab yourself a nice margarita, because we're going to go on a sub crawl now. I'm actually just going to travel from St Enoch station to Partick, so I'm not going right round the circle. The Glasgow subway, it was originally opened in December 1896 it was originally called the Glasgow District Subway Company, and it served Glasgow very well. It's the only wholly underground railway line in the UK outside London. So it was initially using cable traction when it first opened, cable haulage rather, and it was then converted to electric power. A few of the stations have changed names, but it's by and large stayed the same. It's always been the one circle, an inner circle and an outer circle, so it is double track. It is essentially a 6.5 mile long loop, and during the building of it between 1891 and 1896, all 15 stations at the time were provided with island platforms. The Glasgow subway closed in 1977 after some problems were discovered, and it was decided to give the subway a complete refurbishment, a complete upgrading, and it reopened in 1979 with all new trains, completely refurbished and in some cases renamed stations, and so it reopened in 1979, opened by Her Majesty the Queen, and that was a ceremony which was staged at Buchanan Street Station on the 1st of November. And amongst the renamed stations, Govan Cross became just Govan, and Merkland Street became simply Partick. Now, in more recent years, it's been well publicised that there's been yet another refurbishment, much needed it must be said, and there are now driverless trains on the line. They're not completely driverless yet, because for their initial year or so, the new Stadler units are being driven by somebody in the cab until they have reached a certain amount of mileage, and then they're going to go fully automatic. But one thing that does often get forgotten is the previous trains, the 1979 units, which were built by Metro Camel. Now, these ones, they were actually always of semi-automatic operation. So it wasn't a case of a driver was sitting operating a power handle, braking at every curve in every station. They actually followed a predetermined course, which would just be simply activated and deactivated by the driver. So not a lot of people know that. And boarding at St Enoch, the roundabout ticket does allow unlimited access on the subway all day in either direction. You just need to exchange the ticket at the counter. This is one of the new Stadler units, which are 4-car. I should add, you used to be able to get a Strathclyde SPT day tripper ticket, which allowed access to lines not only in the Glasgow area, but also out towards North Ayrshire and across the entire Strathclyde network, including ferries, but it was unfortunately abolished in recent years. That's just leaving Partick there. And rather than get on a train at the interchange, this is a disused railway tunnel, as it's getting dark, quite atmospheric here. That was a tunnel which carried the original Possil to Partick line up towards Crow Road station. There's not much trace of the railway left. This is near Partick West, where there was a triangle of lines adjacent to Dumbarton Road, which is now gone. You can see the Glasgow Harbour Flats there, where the Meadowside Granary once stood until the early 1990s. I've just walked up to Highland Station. This is the new Highland Station. Well, not new, but it was new in 1960. Opened as a through station to replace the original terminus station at Highland. The terminus was actually, the line there was retained a short spur to serve an electric multiple unit depot for many years. But Highland Station opened in 1960. It previously cut across the old line I mentioned there from Possil to Partick, which closed in 1964. The train reporting numbers, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen from time to time, such as 2E53 on this Airdrie to Balloch train, that's another term for what's known as a head code, and that is a way of railway staff being able to identify a train. We're coming towards the end of the video. That's Dulreach. You would just see the junction signal change there to red as the Class 318 curves away on the Balloch branch. I want to thank everyone for watching this video. Please like, subscribe and comment. And as I said before, if you want to know more and find out more detail about the Railways of Glasgow, you have my book Railways of Glasgow Post Beeching available, 160 pages long. So thanks for joining me. I'm on my way back to Craigengorran now on this Class 334. And that's us, the end of a great day out. So long, and thanks for joining me. Now, if you want to know more about the Railways of Glasgow following the 1960s and the Beeching Report, as I've mentioned, I do have my book available, The Railways of Glasgow Post Beeching. It has been re-released twice, so there has been 3 different editions, the most up-to-date one coming out in 2023, so it's fairly up-to-date with a lot of the things that have happened since the first version came out. You can also order a signed copy if you just get in touch with me personally, reach out to me on X, or Twitter as it was known, at Gordon.D.Webster, and you can get a signed copy, I must say, while stocks last, because I don't know when you'll be watching this video. Same goes for any of my books. Please reach out to me and I'll do what I can while they are still in stock. I also want to mention my most recent one about the railways of Cumbria in the north of England, and that's very important because it studies the West Coast Main Line in quite a lot of detail, and also it is, I believe, the first book published about COVID-19 and its impact on Britain's railways.